Hello, everybody. Hello to a wonderful panel. I'm Nick from the People Experience Hub, and I am going to be chairing this panel discussion on the State of the People Profession 2025. So before we get into introductions, I'll just do a bit of scene setting. So we've run this report now for 3 years. This is the first year that we've asked guest editor to come in. It's the first year that we've said, actually, let's get some deeper insights, let's bring some other people in. So a big thank you to Michael Carty, who came in as our guest editor. And I think anyone that will have read the report as part of our prep will agree he's done an absolutely fantastic job. So introducing everybody, I'll hand over and we will introduce the panel, and then what we'll do is we'll jump straight into it. So Idris, could you introduce yourself and then pass over to Joanne?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on, Nick. I'm Idris Arshad, Head of People currently at Asman UK.
Joanne Lockwood, independent founder and CEO of CJ Chapman and Inclusion and Belonging Practice, working with people throughout the UK and further afield.
Hi everyone, I'm Sassy Venables and I'm the founder of the HR Confidence Club.
Amazing. Thank you all so much for being here. When you read the report, when everyone reads the report, everyone on the panel has written their own piece as well to talk about some of the stuff. And I wanted to actually start there, I think, which is rather than getting into the numbers and what we've seen coming from this, I was reading some really interesting points. So, Joanne, if I could start with the comment that you've written, which is leadership development, culture and transformation top the priority list. They do, spoilers, and rightly so. But let's not forget, inclusion is the platinum thread that ties it all together. Equity and belonging aren't side projects. They are the foundation of positive people experiences that attract, retain, and inspire our people. So when I read that, I had one of those moments. And I thought to myself, this is exactly it. In a world right now where we are seeing is the term rollback on EDI, and we're seeing that, and also within our own report where we've seen it's at the lower end of priorities. That sentiment, that statement, just hit it for me.
Yeah, we're in this crazy world at the moment where being good to people is seen as a woke thing, and we've got pressure coming from our Western allies, for want of a better way of describing what's going on over the water. And we've also, at the tail end of the previous government, we saw a lot of anti-wokeness coming out, and we're now seeing an empowerment of people who think that treating people fairly, giving equity in the systems, is something that should be shunned and turned away from. And when we think about all the great work we started with COVID, the well-being, the instant pivoting on that sixpence to start being people-centric and people first, because we were all panicking, had no idea what was going to go on. We learned huge amounts. And it seems that ever since the last 18 months, 2 years, it's almost like a course correction that what we learned was wrong. And I see so many organizations now going, well, back to the office, people second, business priorities, balance sheets, costs. And I think, hang on a minute, we're losing all this goodwill that we really developed with our people. And I thought we were giving birth to a new generation of leadership. And I'm wondering now if that was a overly optimistic statement, because we seem to be regressing back to where we were. And I think that's what concerns me, is that we've gone from real culture first, caring about our people, to now back to where we were in the 90s almost.
I'm going to throw something out there, which is, I suppose a couple of things, and certainly reading through the report and looking at what's happening in the world today, we have a risk that what the media says is true, where actually I'm talking to so many organizations and so many people where this isn't true, but their voices are not being escalated above the noise of general press and clickbait. But actually the piece around that platinum thread that goes through it all is something, actually Sassy, the point around HR confidence and how people move forward is super important. And I want to share something as well, which Rob, our Director of People Science, shared with our team, which is if you want people to be excited about the future, if you want people to move forward past a barrier or a point, if you want people to move forward, there are two things that you really need to help them with. Help them feel safe and help them feel confident. And when people feel safe and people feel confident, what they will do is they will move forward with energy and excitement. And the example is a bungee jumper. You know, if you don't feel safe, you're not jumping. You may feel unsafe, but you're not confident. You're nervous, you're anxious. You may jump, but you're not going to enjoy the experience. And Sassy, the work that you're doing around HR confidence, helping people feel safe in their environment, how do they move forward with that confidence is so important right now. And are you seeing that come through into your world?
Yeah, absolutely. People really don't feel safe, and I think there are a number of factors for that. And I sort of laugh because I've never said the words Maslow's hierarchy of needs so much as I have in the last 18 months. I mean, I think I first learned about it at college, and I was like, yeah. I was in a completely different place there, I think, then. And what I'm seeing is that bottom rung of Maslow with the safety needs just aren't being met at all in some cases.
So I want to start jumping into some stats and something that Idris has talked about. So we'll jump into strategic priorities. And one of the things that we asked Idris to really focus on was around some of that commercial acumen, some stuff about driving strategy within an organization, how do HR and people practitioners live in that space. And what we saw about those strategic people priorities from the report was that the number one strategic priority in 2025 is development of leadership talent, followed by building engagement, supporting transformation, retention, management capability, organizational culture, and enabling innovation. And Idris, you pulled out that when we asked the question about what is getting in the way of delivering on these priorities, the number one thing that came out of that was budget and resources. And I think the comment you've made is, how do you build a strategy where you're developing our leaders to get us through the next few years when we're not being given the budget? How would you frame that? And I think there's probably a wider question, which is, for anyone who's watching this right now and they're thinking about how they do this, is there a no to low cost option on this, or have they got to go and fight for what they need?
I think for me it was interesting to see the matchup between the concerns and the priority. And you can development is a wide ranging word and field. So yes, you can develop leadership talent without spending on external leadership courses and training, but it's top priority. I was surprised that was priority. I will say that, given I've been facing in the past 6 months. So it can be done, but I think that the bit that didn't match up with me was the talk around the economic downturn, as well as that being a concern as well. It's a bit like, well, if you develop your leaders, that is good. You know, I always say there's not a bad organization ever that exists with good leaders. It just doesn't happen. If you have good leadership, you generally have good organizations. So that for me was the bit. But what I would be hoping that the focus is also there is underneath that developing leadership talent is the things around what is facing a lot of workforces at the moment. The challenges around reward, benefits, cost of living, EDI that Joanne mentioned as well, and well-being. I'd want to see that at the forefront when we're talking about developing leadership talent. The hope is that when we're developing those leaders is to think about those areas, to think about people's well-being, to think about people's inclusion, and to think about how we're going to reward and recognise the good work that our workforces do. So, it was very interesting, but my hope is that does translate downwards into good leadership as well.
I think this is really interesting. And for anyone that is watching live on LinkedIn, if you raise questions and if you put comments, we'll be able to flash those up to the whole panel. There we go. Luke Morrison has asked a question, which is, it'd be good to hear the panel's thoughts on, given the report's emphasis on HR growing strategic influence, how can organizations effectively incorporate neurodiversity, equity and inclusion into their overarching business strategies? So is there anyone that wants to answer Luke's question on that right now?
I guess it's my bag as well. So let me give some thoughts on that. Equity is becoming a toxic word, certainly from over the water. So I think what we need to do is go back to core principles. What are we trying to achieve? And I talk about positive people experiences. That's what we're trying to outcome. We're trying to come out with creating environments where everyone can thrive. And when we think about people with neurodiversity, people with disabilities, hidden or physical, what we're trying to do is create equity in the system where there's trust. I believe I can succeed. I know that I'm going to get the support I need. Buzzwords like psychological safety, all those things need to come into that equation. And it's not about focusing on particular silos of people's demographic or characteristic, but creating this culture where everyone can thrive and be themselves. I think going back to what we're saying just now, is that with the right leadership and the right level of leadership focusing on creating systems where everyone can thrive, then everyone will thrive, and then the diversity, the different differences come out second. But I also recognise that we have to put specific equity systems in place for neurodiversity, for disability, for gender, making sure the gender pay gaps, making sure ethnicity pay gaps are there and sorted. Because if we don't have those priorities, then nothing gets done. So I think it's a bit of everything, really. Work on the culture, expose any toxicity, create psychological safety, and build equity into the processes, and look at individual needs in a person-centric basis.
I think that's brilliant. I'm going to bring Sassy something you said, which is the range. This is the comment that you've left in the report. The range of skills and knowledge required and expected of HR is vast, the majority of which could be deemed to be specialist in and of itself, and yet we adapt to at a moment's notice to be the specialist in the room. And Idris, your comment about why was reward and benefits so low on the agenda, why is EDI low on the agenda, and your comments then, Joanne, and Sassy, your comment, I wonder, and it goes into that feeling of burnout, we can talk about the burnout stuff in a minute, I wonder if HR are taking it all on themselves. Like, we have to be everything and have to do everything, and it isn't about enabling an organization to deliver. Do you feel like that, Sassy?
Absolutely, and it's really frustrating. And I talk about, it's comforting to see that there's been the statistics are up by 16.7% that there's a HR person on exec boards, and that's brilliant. But there needs to be more of that, which links into the comment Luke was making. If you've got the right people in the right places at the right time when your strategy is being formulated, and your right stakeholders there, they're going to be thinking of these things as part and parcel of the process improvement, like Joanne was talking about. But if they're not there, and then we're brought in months later when the strategy has been created, it's really hard to try and come back from that. And I think what I would say is there is so much uncertainty. The economy's changing, the expectations of us are changing, all of the skills. I mean, there's so many skills there. A number of them are specialisms in and of themselves. And yet now we're being asked, I think the latest one is psychological and neurological science, isn't it? Which is part and parcel of human behaviour. But is the world of work going down qualifications route? So I've waffled a little bit there because we are brought in to be the specialist. People look at us when COVID happened. People look at us to say, how are we going to survive the next few months? What do we need to do? So I'm not sure if I quite answered your question, but I do feel that is the case.
I think it's a great response. And Idris, you're a chief people officer, HR director. It can't be your team's job to make every single person in the organization feel safe and feel confident and have that stability, but it's got to be your team's job to help the line managers, the leadership, the rest of the organization. Is there a risk that HR get frustrated in what's going on and try and take it on themselves, or is there a focus that needs to happen now, which is it's about enablement, not just the doing?
I think that the focus that you mentioned, Nick, is crucial. When we speak about EDI, what we find ourselves in HR doing is that we focus EDI on the workforce, and it's solely centered around that. And we forget that regardless of the sectors we're in, we have stakeholders, we have customers, clients, beneficiaries, whichever term we want to use in our sectors, that EDI is just as important to have a focus on them as well. But back to that bit of where HR are taking on a lot, is it HR's role to look after the EDI for your customers? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But I find that if you have the relevant people, as Sasi was saying, in the room, to say, actually, I know our customers best, we know our workforce best. How about we come together and look at EDI from a holistic point of view? And back to Luke's question around how do you incorporate that, is making sure that you cover EDI in every aspect and facet of your organization, so that your suppliers, your stakeholders, your customers, your workforce, your volunteers, they're all included in that. And I think that plays a part too when we get to talk about burnout, is how much are we taking on? And I often find that HR, in the line of work that we do in the purest way of making sure that we don't make the decisions, but we enable the organization to be have better leadership, have better teams. We have that duty of that kind of moral compass where we do get people do fall back on us. It happened in COVID, it'll happen in a range of different scenarios where HR looked at us that, tell me where I'm going with this. Am I right? Am I wrong? And it's it's why I think if you look at the work from the CIPD about the incorporation of ethics into the profession map, and why that is a huge thing, and it should be. And when we think of it from that lens, it becomes very it's a matter of almost the heart, really, isn't it? When we're doing our line of work, when we're talking about sensitive issues, even economic downturn, people's well-being, they are very personal issues, and it is a lot for HR professionals to take on. What can help with that is having those lines of accountability, really. Like you said, Nick, we're not there to change someone's life per se, but if we have the right approach and working with our leaders and our managers and our workforces, we can get to a point where we're actually shifting that down, helping people's well-being and inclusion and their general experience at work.
Can I chip in something just as you were talking there? Sassy chucked in a bit of Maslow. Can I put in a bit of a side hustle here for Hertzberg's two-factor theory? Because we're talking here about why rewards and benefits so low down on people's needs. Because if you think, Hertzberg says, performance is ability times motivation times environment. And I often think about the hygiene factor in his equation is EDI, it's psychological safety, it's trust, it's belongingness. I don't expect belongingness to be a motivational factor. I expect it to be a baseline thing. So it's not surprising that we're more concerned about what matters to us in terms of just basic getting along, flexible working, childcare. Can I afford to live? Do I have to go to the office? Am I going to have equity in my system? That's what we're concerned about. There's no point in trying to motivate me with rewards and benefits right now until we get the basics right. I think that's what's happened over the last 18 months, 2 years, is we slipped down thinking we had the basics there, and now we're eroding them again. I think that's why people are less focused on the reward side, because they're so worried about that bottom two layers of Maslow, that hygiene level in Hertzberg.
I think as well, I think that's a brilliant point, actually. And it's been a while since I've been thinking about two-factor theories, but the reality is you're absolutely right. When we think about hygiene, there isn't 110%. It is a ceiling. That's and it's either Rob in the team, I remember he once said to me, when we think about two-factor and we think about hygiene factors, we need to not think of them as motivators, but think of them as detractors. So when we're not doing something that is a hygiene factor that people would expect to have in an organization, then what we see is it detracts from culture, safety, engagement, whatever that positive people outcome is. If we're not achieving those things and we're not delivering them for people, we won't overcome them by the motivators, and the motivators are the things that will dial you up, but you have to have the hygiene in place first. So I think it's a brilliant point. And I mean, I'm going to throw like a question. It might be an unfair question. This might be an unfair question, because I'm interested in this. When we looked, and I'm going to come on to burnout next. I'm going to bring it forward. I was going to do it a little bit later, but I'm going to bring it forward because it's been raised. But I just want to do skills and knowledge gap, because what we're seeing in this, and we come back to this, is around things like EDI, building an employer brand and the employee experience, reward and benefits. We're seeing that empathy, listening, all of that stuff. What we're seeing is the responses in our survey are showing that the majority of respondents have said, this isn't a skills gap. We can do this, right? But they may not be ranking it as important for the future. So they're not saying they can't do it. They're saying we can do it. It's not a skills gap in our business or with myself or my team, but it's not as important for me in the future. And when I look at what's important to the future, commercial acumen, strategy development, using AI, analyzing, interpreting data, I'm seeing those things which are probably the frustration points for people in HR, because they don't have budget. And I can see then that we can draw some lines to this. But I'm going to ask this question, which is, and probably Joanne, you're probably the most qualified person to answer this. Do you think in our world of people professionals, and I'm going to qualify this because I don't think that I am skilled, and I think I can learn a lot more in the area of EDI and building belonging into an organization, do you think the summary in our report is right, that HR people are saying, the skills, we got them, don't worry about that?
I think sometimes people see EDI, inclusion work, as a pure extension of HR. I would like to see it as a separate thread, a separate skill set. So it might well be that we often are listening to the loud voices, listening to lived experience, without actually putting sustainable, sticky changes in our culture. They're point solutions, they're following hashtags, they're following trends. I think what we're often not doing is looking at the real cause and effect, the real underlying thing. So we focus so much on the DE, the I, these buzzwords, and not about the outcomes of what we're trying to achieve here. So I think it's not fair to say that nobody's got skills, but it's also fair, I think, to believe that there are different skills required from operational HR, from strategic culture building, because culture goes across the business. And I often think a lot of it is values led, which is not all about HR. Some of it's about branding, it's about marketing, it's about corporate messaging. When we look at talent acquisition and recruitment marketing, it's got the word marketing in it. Employer value proposition is all about brand and who you are and how you come out to the world. So I think there are a lot of skills here. Maybe the traditional HR practitioner, the HR manager, the HRD, doesn't necessarily have. They're maybe people focused, but not necessarily brand and marketing focused. And I think a lot of that is a blend of skills across the business, putting all that business together, and to maybe expect HR to fix all that is slightly unfair. This needs to be a team effort to bring in the different aspects of the business. So to say they have got the skills, I think it's this case that they've got a large element of the skill, but not the full picture.
Agree. I would absolutely agree. D&I is a specialism in and of itself. That's huge, just the legislation around that. So the implementation thereof, it is a whole role. And the difficulty is that people or organisations don't see the tangible outputs quickly enough. And that's why you always end up having redundancies first in those areas. And I can talk from personal experience in a couple of places there. I've been a DEI specialist for about 10 years.
It's really. I'm going to move us on to burnout. We have had a couple of comments. So from Maria has said, absolutely agree. You know, the sand is constantly shifting, so we need to ensure the fundamentals are in place, and when we know what good looks like, work to maintain it. So that the balance between two-factor and hierarchy and needs, I think, is really important. And Audrey's asked a question, which I'm going to come back to this actually, Audrey, which is about how does HR manage the jostling of departments and being inclusive? Because I want to focus on burnout, because it's obviously come up and it feels like it's a hot topic right now, but also one that is conflicting and probably a little bit confusing. So we flagged that burnout is a risk for HR in 2025, and according to the respondents that we've had, almost half, 46.1% of people said that they felt that they have experienced burnout in the last 12 months. We qualified this when we did the survey, where we gave the World Health Organization's definition of burnout to people before we asked the question. So based on that definition, do you feel that you have had burnout? And it's also important to recognize that I don't think anyone on this panel, myself included, are medical practitioners. So we are not going to be forwarding any medical advice. We're not going to be forwarding any solutions for this. What we're going to be doing is talking about our experiences. Burnout is a phenomenon. It's not clinically diagnosed. So I think that's really important to call out right now. But with 46.1% of HR people saying that they have felt some kind of burnout in the last year, and looking at the numbers, senior managers and department heads with slightly above that, are we seeing this phenomenon across HR starting to really impact? And we've talked a lot about HR potentially spreading themselves thinly across lots of things due to lack of resources and lack of budget, trying to tackle everything, but not always succeeding because you can't do everything at once. Is this a feeling of frustration that is leading to a lack of then eating away at that confidence, tackling that safety? Idris, what are you seeing in your own experience of this?
I'm going to start off with probably the area I feel doesn't get enough attention from ourselves as HR professionals, and it sounds a bit odd, but I'll explain it, is the way we structure our HR teams and our operating models. I think that what I'm essentially saying is we need to help ourselves first. And I was just teaching yesterday level 5 CIPD students around this notion of making sure you look at yourself first. There was a unit I was teaching about saying, look at yourself, how you collaborate, how your productivity works, how you view HR, and the focus is on yourself, because if it isn't, how are you going to be of use to anyone else? So I was literally teaching that yesterday. And for me, how much time do we spend on saying, right, we've got this to deliver. Here's our mandate. We've got 3 years. This is what we're going to deliver. And here's the resource I need. Now, traditionally, we think of resourcing as we just need these 6 people, these roles, the specialist here, specialist there. We neglect things like that get in the way of everyday things, sickness, absence, people being on leave, several different things that reduce a working year. So I find we don't help ourselves by structuring ourselves in the right way to deliver what we need to. And then the second thing, how much time do we spend on our operating models? And what I mean by that is the way we do HR. That could be the root cause of people feeling like they are burnt out, when we've said we're going to work in this way with managers, and here's how we're going to, for example, here's our reward offering, here's our employee relations offering, this is how we're going to do it. I find that there's not enough time spent on that, and therefore we'd end up being led heavily by the organization rather than us setting the tone for our own strategies. That is where I feel the work, it needs to be prioritized more effort into our structures, more effort into our operating models. We help other teams in the organizations change when we change strategic direction. How often do we look at the HR team first and say, actually, we're heading in a different direction. We need to be more expansive. Let me look at my team first. Do we need to change our operating model? Do we need to work more autonomously and less with leadership teams and make sure that they're more accountable? That's the line of work that I think we need to be focusing on at step 1. Before we get into anything around taking our lunch breaks and so forth, I think that for me is the starting point, in my view. And I think that can have the biggest impact, because if we get that right, get the resourcing right, and we set the expectations with the organization that this is the work we're going to do, this is how we're going to deliver it, this is what we're going to achieve, we've set the tone to then follow and see that through. If we haven't done that, I find this a very tough environment to be working in when everything is just up for grabs.
Do you know what? I was going to just go straight over to Sassy, but I'm just going to jump in because you're so right, and we see the likes of Perry Timms who are talking about HR 3.0 as a new way of thinking about HR and restructuring how we think of the organisation. But I spent a lot of time as a trade union rep and a branch official, and as part of that, understanding work measurement, and in my time at places like Tesco and Carlsberg in-house, understanding how we do workforce planning and workforce strategy. And we build it from the ground up, which is it takes this many people to pick this many boxes over this many hours. We have this much boxes to pick in a day. We need this many people to pick the boxes. And the algebra that a workforce planner or a workforce strategist has to do is to simply say, we can either pick fewer boxes and have fewer people. We can pick the right amount of boxes, but this is how many people I need. Yeah, or I can have too many people, and that's where I get extra cost. And that's where you'll see a challenge in my organization around our cost management. And the only way I can change the picking of a box is either to make it simpler to pick a box, more efficient to pick a box, so I need fewer people to pick that many boxes, but the number of boxes doesn't change. And you're absolutely right. I've never thought about it like this. Never ever have I sat in a HR team and said, these are the boxes we've got to pick this year in HR. This is how many people we need to do it, and this is the buffer we need for sickness, absence, holidays, weddings, everything else that happens in our life. So I'm on board. I'm on board with that. Sassy, as somebody who is supporting HR people, talking to HR communities, but working in HR as well, do you feel the same?
Yeah, I do think we are. I think people are talking about the cobbler's children, and I think we are always trying to look after other departments and transformation of other departments and processes and things, and supporting them, and not looking at ourselves first. So I think Idris is correct there. But again, it links back to what we were talking about, that if we're not on the board, knowing the direction of the organisation, how can we deliver what they want us to deliver if our own house isn't in order? We've got to do that first. So that reaction piece is always a nightmare, and it brings that uncertainty with it. So we're constantly trying to upskill at the same time as something needs to happen, is my opinion of what I'm observing. But what I'm trying to do, I think, around the HR Confidence Club stuff is not that I want it to be an individually led and all eyes on the individual, that we've got to take an approach of self-preservation, but we kind of do. And I've been thinking a lot around, the title, I call it HR Confidence, but I don't really talk about what we do in HR, because there's lots of specialist people delivering that. It's all the inner work, I think, in how we tool ourselves up, our mental ability and agility. How are we coping with the stresses? How are we coping with the uncertainty of, AI coming in, and now psychological neuroscience? What can we do ourselves if we haven't got proactive support in our organisations?
And linking it back into the report, we asked, in terms of the burnout section, we asked a few burnout indicators, which were, are you finding yourself caring less about people, stakeholders, or customers than you would like? Because that's a sign of burnout that people can recognize. And do I find that I don't have the energy to face the day? So again, a kind of an indicator question that says, are you heading towards that burnout? And we did see more people, particularly in smaller organizations, saying that they found themselves caring less than they would have liked to. Competing time, competing challenges. So I think what I'm seeing, and we've had some questions about AI and we've talked about AI, I think what I'm seeing is we're in this perfect storm where HR have competing time constraints, they have competing organizational priorities, they have shifting sand, as I think it was Monica that just said that, shifting sand of what's going on in the world. They're trying to cope with all of this stuff. They don't have the budget, they don't have the resource. So what they're trying to do, and certainly what I'm seeing from the report, is they're trying to do more, trying to do everything, and they're going to have to let something go. And it feels like as we move things like EDI, is it because, and I don't know the answer to this, is it because the focus is now on organizational pressures that are more important to the organization, grow the top line, sort the bottom line, make people redundant, get them retrained? So as the focus becomes more clarified from an organization, which might not be the right focus, are HR people finding that the competition is too great and therefore they're just dialing into one thing? And that leads me to my next statement on skills gap. Luke's comment, the number one skill that people felt was important for 2025 and the number one skill gap was understanding and using AI, which amazed me. As somebody who works in a tech company, who is building AI, who has a team of people that are building AI solutions, I think that people are hoping that AI is going to solve this problem for them, that AI is going to come along and fix things, and therefore they see it as a strategic skill and a skills gap that they have to solve, because if I could just get AI working, you know, I rarely go in to meet with potential new clients and they don't ask the question of, what AI do you have to help our people, you know, just make quick decisions? And it's like, that's not what AI is for. So I'm really interested in that. So Joanne, probably I've just dumped a lot of stuff there, which is around our competing priorities, moving the things into the wrong places. And then my next question is, I'm going to open up the AI debate, everyone. So this is going to be a jump in moment.
So touch on the burnout first. Just have a quick thought on that. So speaking probably from my own experience, burnout, I think there's a line in the sand where you are burnt out. You approach burnout, then you burn out, and it's almost like this delta. You get to the point where you have to admit, I can no longer cope. Up to that point there, your behavior changes, you know, your capability changes, your passion changes, but then you hit this threshold of, I am now burnt out. And I think some of that is coming back to, you know, phrases like psychological safety. I can't speak up in my organization and say I'm struggling, because that's not acceptable a response I give to my manager or my team. If we all felt that we could declare I can't cope as being a positive sign to need help, then that would go some way to preventing that escalation of burnout. So I think burnout is a symptom or an effect of environments and cultures where people can't truly express the challenges they're facing. Then they can't get support. Because in a great organization with great culture, if there's too much work, you all sit around the table and say, what can we do then? Here's the list. Let's draw a line. Anything below the line is not the priority today. We focus on above. So again, giving people expectations of how to succeed in their role and not taking on the weight of the world, because we're all passionate, we all care, we all want to achieve everything, but we also don't want the shame and stigma of letting things go or letting things drop. So I think it's symptomatic of the culture we're breeding, is people get to that point without being able to ask for help. So I think that's what we can do in terms of burnout, address that. Culture first. Let's get in there and think, why can't people share this? Because people often mask burnout until that last minute where bang, it all goes wrong.
Yeah.
So how can we see those signs and track that progress in HR as well? Because we think we're there to mother and father the whole organization, but sometimes we need to put our own oxygen mask on. We need to have someone come to us and say, are you okay? Are you doing all right? And we can do that with each other. So that's my kind of perspective on burnout. And if we're not careful, it's the difference between blowing into a balloon and blowing into a straw. A balloon, you've got feedback. You know how much you've done because you can see it. Blowing into a straw, it just keeps sucking the energy out of you, and there's no stop mark. So again, what we need to do is create a balloon where we can see how much we are achieving and see our progress.
And be open about those external indicators as well with your colleagues. You know, something we do internally, I always say to people, you'll know when I am tired and when I've reached a point when I'm beyond tired, because my skin gets dry here and I turn up with looking fatigued. So I think it is really interesting about having those open, honest conversations and about identifying them. I think it's really interesting. I'd love to see an environment where people are putting workforce planning thinking into HR teams to understand the work that they have to deliver. versus the resources and the people they have to do it, and think of it more like in the way an operator would think. Which probably does take us then nicely onto that skills piece. And the skills that people will need in the future that are seen as a gap, understanding and working with AI, analyzing, interpreting data, commercial acumen, strategy development, and stakeholder management. Potentially these are higher up because they're a frustration point. I can't get my budget. I can't seem to influence people that we're doing this. Is that fair, or is there something more we need to understand?
On the skills gap, I mean, I expected AI to be at the top, given the amount of every conference you go to, AI is a topic. Even if a conference isn't about AI seems to jump in. I personally haven't seen that big wave and hit of AI that I expected when ChatGPT first came about. I haven't seen that boom, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
We have had recent announcement how in the UK there's going to be investment in data centers. It's going to help in the civil service, and that's all good indications. But I haven't seen that kind of, real, as I said, boom of kind of AI in all organizations, because it does cost money to implement and to harness. I think, as I alluded to in my take on things, is that we've neglected what's always been there. The science of the brain. That's, for me, much more of a key area and a key focus, and something that we've probably neglected as a profession altogether, that we need to be focusing on. It's interesting how it's placed as high, a high skill gap, but not as a high importance, which I'm again thinking, why aren't we doing that? Why aren't we doing that? So I think as much as AI is there, it's around us, our workforces are using it with our knowledge, without our knowledge. I don't think it's the number one. When it comes to it, it's it's not, like you said, Nick, it's not going to solve all our problems, and I don't think it will. I think it will just add to the complexity of the things that we already have to deal with, because there is no real governance and regulation around AI. So it's a real open field when it comes to it. And my view is that we should go back to focusing on what can be really tangible and really impactful. Neuroscience and psychology, human behavior, that's where I'd be kind of really looking at from a skill gap and a skill improvement point of view.
I think that's a really interesting point. Anna's made a great point as well around HR departments need counselling, training and self-awareness, maybe more training on that perhaps. Can't pour from an empty cup, and HR shoulder so many issues it's not simply trained for. And I see it quite a lot. Who's there for HR? Who's HR for HR? And I suspect that's why AI is quite high, because what HR are trying to do, or people professionals trying to do, is build capacity. Is there a tool that can come in now and just take the workload from me? Can I introduce AI and it writes my processes quicker, writes my procedures quicker? And they're also facing into that marketing budget of all those big AI companies who are promising that, of course it will. If you just simply pay us a small amount of money, we will be able to take away your woes. But you're also right, we're humans, and humans focus on human things, and things that we know, we don't need AI to tell us, we don't need AI to convince us. And playing into confidence, Sassy, if people are feeling safe and they're feeling confident and you throw AI into the mix, do I feel safe using AI? Do I feel confident using AI? The answer is no. Right, we're very clear from our reports. The answer is no. We do not feel safe using AI. We do not feel confident, but we see it. We see it as a tool for the future, and then that must be causing a little bit of friction in terms of how people are thinking about what AI is and what it isn't.
There's a real need to carve time out. I mean, I know I could probably use AI a lot more effectively, but then you really do need to carve the time out in your day to learn it, to learn the specific tools as well. There's so many tools that could be useful, and then it's writing the correct prompt, isn't it? Because otherwise you end up going backwards and forwards. I'm on GTP all the time, and I'm like, oh, I didn't mean that. Can we change that a little bit?
Mm-hmm.
So, and that becomes time consuming as well if you don't actually know what you're doing in the first place.
And all this stuff is so, and I think when we deal with anything around the people profession, we deal with interconnected things. Jordan's just made a great point, which the AI conversation reminds me of the big data conversations. It will calm down. This stuff is going to calm down. It didn't change the world, so it's really interesting. And I was going to make the point about blockchain. I remember when blockchain came out, and blockchain was going to solve the world. So big data was going to solve it, blockchain was going to solve it. And guess what I'm seeing now is AI experts who only a few years ago were blockchain experts, and only a few years before that were big data experts, and only a few years before that were futurologists and future of work specialists. And none of this really came to fruition in a way that changed the world of work. So my counsel to anyone on AI is slow down. Trust in your own skills, because AI is a child and it comes loaded with bias, it comes loaded with risk, it comes loaded with ethical concerns. And Kate Griffith-Lambert, she made a great statement, which was, there will be a court case in the future where somebody says the decision was made by AI, and someone will say that is not good enough. AI is not culpable and it cannot be held accountable. The human who asked the question and the human who took the response will be the person who ends up in front of the courts. So let's just slow it down a little.
Sorry, I'm laughing at Steve Whittle's comment about going viral faster than a cat video.
Brilliant. And Steve, sorry, go for it. Yeah.
I saw a keynote by Wendy McDougall at Firefish Software the other week, and one important thing she said is you think about autonomous cars, autonomous vehicles. They're really great, but at some point you still need to be able to grab the wheel and take control. So I think when we're putting AI into our processes, and as she put it quite eloquently, we need to look at where we can let the vehicle drive itself and where we need to grab the hands. And so as people, we need to think about when we interact with people and be ready to step in seamlessly, not have a transition between I'm talking to a computer, I'm talking to a person, I'm talking to a computer, but seamlessly transition your augmented AI here to add value to your process, not replace your process. And I think a lot of what we're seeing is in the vendor space, in HR systems, talent acquisition systems, ATSs, HRMSs, we see AI creeping in there. So I don't think the average HR practitioner needs to be AI savvy, but maybe the HRD, the IT director needs to be savvy as to the benefit that tool is going to give and the risk and compliance elements that will generate. So we can trust Workday, we can trust Smart Recruiters, we can trust other platforms to augment our experience with AI, provided we understand that risk. I think it comes back to your point. If we're in court and we've rejected a candidate and it's AI that's created that bias, then we have to own that. We can't delegate that risk.
I think it's such a good point, and I think augment is probably the best word for this. And I can't remember, a professor of work at Coventry University, and I can't remember his name off the top of my head now. It might be Michel Petro, who talks about augmentation is far better than replacement. Augmentation is far better than decision making. Things that augment us to help us move faster are better than things that replace us. And when I look at our report, which says where are people spending their time and where do they believe they should be spending their time, let's take a look at the time drain box. Improving our processes and policies. Well, there's a use case for AI right there. In everyone's mind, can I get AI to help me think about our processes and policies differently? Can I help it write something in draft that we can then edit? Resolving and dealing with operational issues. And, how do I fix that in the front of it? Where they are spending their time, but they feel that they shouldn't be, implementing HR technology, managing redundancies, finding the labor, finding the talent, employee relations challenges. These are things that AI probably are not going to really help you with. So really interesting as a mix there. Now we have had some questions come in, so I'm aware we've only got 10 minutes. So we had a question about, so let's go back. So Jordan made a comment, which is, I think, Idris's comment about maintaining expectations for stakeholders is really important here. It's about managing your customers to understand the reality. HR, I see it a lot. HR are people pleasers. There's a lot of people pleasers in HR. Let's make sure that we are absolutely managing the stakeholders. And Luke said, with AI becoming more and more prominent in people processes, how can we ensure it doesn't unintentionally exclude neurodivergent talent or reinforce bias during hiring? So that's probably something that is a useful thing. Does anyone have any views on that?
I think from my view, we've seen plenty of examples of how AI has gone wrong. So there's already something saying to us that AI isn't complete and it will have errors. Not only on that topic, it's I remember one example of how through an AI chatbot, people's data and payroll data was accessed by an employee just through that. So I think that's back to the bit you said about Nick, about the also an element of caution when using AI, kind of, small steps at a time. So I think if you want to introduce it for hiring, know the risks that come with that, and you've got to be comfortable defending that if you're going to introduce it. That's my view, that if you've taken that reason to introduce it into recruitment, you've got to take what comes with that, the good in terms of your efficiencies around shortlisting and increased analytics. But on the other side, when you get issues around EDI and people being excluded, you've got to be able to kind of have that defense, because it won't be, as you said, Nick, AI on the stand. It will be yourself.
I think that's a great point, and we'll probably end the AI stuff there, because we're into our last 8 minutes. And I asked a question with a client I was with yesterday. I said we were doing this webinar, and I said, what's the one thing that you think HR could do? They're a retail business, multi-site, lots of different sites, lots of stores. What's the one thing that HR can do today that your teams are asking for? And the lady in HR thought for a minute, and she said, the most important thing that we can do right now is free our operators to operate, to allow them to deliver an awesome customer experience so that every customer who comes in comes back and brings 5 other people, that we focus on enabling our operators to understand the friction points between poor culture and good culture, but we do it in a way that is translated into the way they talk about it themselves and what they can consume in a fast-moving environment. And if we do that, we will have our seat at the board. We will be seen as commercially aware, strategic, and aligned to the organization. And actually, that would free up a lot of our time to focus on the things that we know we need to work on. And I thought, wow, what a lovely, I had to bring it back to the table today, because I thought, what a lovely succinct way. So I'm going to ask each person the same question, which is, over the next 12 months into 2026, what's the one thing that HR, or the one thing, what are the things that HR should be thinking about and doing that's going to add the biggest value to both their organization, the balance of the organization, and their people? I'll give everyone like a minute or two to think about that, because I've just thrown that in. I'm just going to tell everyone out there as well, by the way, that if you want to download the State of the People Profession report, there's a QR code on the screen. The panel has joined today with no questions thrown at them as well, so everything has been a bit shoot from the hip. I wanted a real raw response from everybody on this, but each of them have read the reports. So I'm now going to dial back towards that panel and say, right, that was a complete off-the-cuff comment. Is anyone ready to jump in on that?
For me, if I go first, I think it's going back to the real basics, but that has the biggest impact. And it's back to my point I made around structuring and operating models. But for the workforce, for the leadership teams, for the organization, tell people what HR do. Now, it goes into this kind of almost branding of HR, but people still have different stigmas attached to HR about what we do. They have different perceptions based on their experiences, but just really saying, this is what we do, this is how we're going to do it. is for me the starting point, but it's the biggest thing you could do. Once people know when they come to you and what value you add, you've, for me, thrown away a lot of those challenges that usually come our way. The fight that we have to get to the table. When the table knows what you're doing, you'll be asked to come in my view. So it's almost that HR branding piece of, are we telling people what we do, how we do it? Do they know what we do? And a simple kind of test measure of that is just ask people in the organization, what does HR do? You'll get an array of responses. But if you can get that messaging right, for me, it's the most powerful thing to start off with and continue to build on when it comes to what we should be doing for 24, 25, 26, and makes everything a little bit easier going forward.
So cool. And I think it's a great response. And as the lovely Cat Lewis says, clarity is kindness. Set the scene, manage your stakeholders. Clarity is a goal, actually. So love that. Joanne, did you want to go next?
Yeah, it just picked my opening phrase, which was go back to basics, and I completely agree. Turn down the dial of noise. There's a lot of noise going on at the moment, a lot of anti this, anti that. We've got a lot of pressures with cost of living and other things going on in the world. I think what we need to do as HR is go back to the basics, which is caring about our people. Let's look at ourselves first. Yes, we need to sit at the table. Yes, we need to be strategic. Yes, we need to be that trusted business partner at a board level. But I think what we've got right now is, as we've shown in this report, a lack of hygiene, we've got a lack of trust, lack of psychological safety. If we can double down on getting our people focused, productive, feeling safe, feeling aligned with the business objectives, then we'll be in a better position. Because if we're not careful, we try and hire our way out of it, have another initiative, we've got another U-turn. We've got to bring our people with us. And if our people aren't shoulder to shoulder with us, backing what we're doing, caring about and being engaged with the organization, then we're just batting off a sticky wicket. It's not going to work. So yeah, double down, focus on our people, get the basics right, create real value and trust in our people, in our organization, and then advocate for our people at board and at senior leadership level, and get everyone to buy into the strategy and let AI do its thing in the background.
I think we can all celebrate that, Joanne. I'm going to hand over to Sassy as well. We're into the last 3 minutes.
So first of all, I wrote support. Make sure there's support there for our employees and our line managers. But then I thought, well, that's too big. And I wrote clarity of what we do, which is what Idris said. So I think I would end on partly what Joanna said about actually asking the question of our HR people individually, are we okay? And actually wanting to know that answer. Going back to the health, the safety, and the welfare of all our employees, because I think welfare mentally sometimes gets forgotten about, and we do have a real duty of care for all of our employees, and HR are those employees too, and really want to know the genuine answer. So that's the question I would like our organisations to ask.
I love that. I love that so much. I think it is super powerful, and it reminds me as well. Everything reminds me of a phrase which is about being more human and going back to the fact that we are all, well, firstly, we're all employees of our organizations, but we're all human. And I used to share this whenever I talked about well-being at a conference, which was the International Labour Organization document, which said, before a producer is a producer, we have to remember they're a human first, with human needs, human motivations, and human frustrations. We must manage those to ensure that we have the most efficient producers in our business. And this is obviously talking about production environments and the rest of it. And that was written in 1957. So I think going back to basics is super useful, and certainly one of the outcomes from our report, or certainly what we're seeing as the outcome from our report, is that HR have a lot of incredible things to be working on. They are working on some phenomenal things at the same time as managing huge change, developing that resilience, but also spreading themselves across so many different areas. We're seeing that burnout in smaller organizations where there's probably fewer HR people. So I think the thing that I would add on, less about the organization that people are in and more about us as a community, is, as a community, we should share what's working well. Don't gatekeep the good work you're doing. Share it loudly, share it proudly. If only one person reads a LinkedIn post about something you've just discovered, that's one person that you've helped. And it didn't take long to write that. This isn't about being an influencer. This isn't about being out there and sharing it to masses. It's about just getting out there and sharing stuff. And I think the one thing that we need to probably go back to is that COVID community approach, which I would probably say is pre-COVID was great, which is we share stories, we ask questions, we're not embarrassed to ask those questions, we're not embarrassed to show where we don't know things or to ask for help. And if we can do all of that, then we can all help each other. And I think part of our State of the People Profession report is about trying to get some information out to a wider community as well. So, because it doesn't add any sales collateral to our business. We do this because we've just worked in HR a long time and we get it. So I'd like to say thank you, Joanne, Sassy, and Idris for joining me today. It's been absolutely brilliant. And anyone who wants a copy of the report, you can download it. Smileys. And if anyone has any questions, do reach out to everyone from the panel and ask those questions, and let's build that community approach. So thank you, everybody, and we'll say goodbye.
Thank you for having me, Nick.